Chapter 18. After school that day, I was grumpy and mean. Mrs. V had prepared a new stack of word cards for me. Penny was wearing one of Mrs. V's turbans, and she looked ridiculous. Plus, she kept singing some stupid baby song at the top of her lungs. I took my arm and swept the whole pile of cards to the floor. "Who put salt in your Kool-Aid, Miss Thing?" Mrs. V asked. She did not pick up the cards. Penny stopped singing and stood there blinking at me. I switched the meta-talker to off and looked away. "Fine, be like that, but you're going to pick up every single one of those cards." I stuck out my lip and stared at the wall. Penny reached out and shook my arm. I tugged it loose. She didn't seem to care and started singing again. "Happy, happy, happy, clap your feet. Happy, sappy, pappy, blow your nose. Biddy, body, bowie, jump and jump." She jumped. She stomped her feet, and then she sang the song again and again. She was really getting on my nerves. I wish she would just shut up. Taking all the time, walking all the time, talking all the time, walking all the time, jumping and bouncing and singing. Just quit it. Just for one moment. Please, stop. But she wouldn't. "Hi, Dee Dee," she said, and she put Doodle on my tray. I pushed the toy to the floor. "Doodle Dee Dee." She picked up the stupid raggedy thing and placed it on my tray once more. I knocked it off again. "Leave me alone," I thought to myself. I wanted to scream. Penny was used to things falling off my chair, so she couldn't know I was just being plain horrible. The third time she put Doodle on my tray, I swept it off with such force that my arm brushed Penny's head, and she toppled over and fell to the floor. She looked at me in surprise on her face, grabbed Doodle, and ran to Mrs. V in tears. "What has gotten into you, Melody?" Mrs. V asked. She rocked Penny on her lap. How could I explain? I didn't want to cry, but I did. I turned my wheelchair so it faced the wall just as the phone rang. Mrs. V looked from me to the phone, sighed, and got up to answer it. "Oh, hello, Catherine." "Catherine?" I turned my chair slightly to listen better. "Out of sorts?" Mrs. V asked. "Well, as a matter of fact, she does seem a little mopey this afternoon. No, I take that back. She's downright monstrous." Mrs. V caught my eye and made a funny face at me. I just glared at her. I'm not surprised she got all the questions right. The child is brilliant. A lot of good it does me, I thought to myself. The teacher said, "What?" Great. Now everybody would know. Just thinking about it made me feel like pond scum again. In front of her classmates? What kind of professional is he supposed to be? Mrs. V looked furious. How did she react? Never mind. I already know. She's sitting here looking like one of those blowfish we saw at the aquarium, all puffed up and spiny. That's actually kind of close to how I felt. "Thanks so much for calling, Catherine," Mrs. V said. "Yes, please call her parents this evening, and I'll be sure to talk to them as well. I'm going to work on this problem right now." With that, she hung up the phone, sat Penny down on the floor, put her hands on her hips, and turned and looked at me. I figured here's where she'd hug me and make me feel better. "So, you aced the quiz and then bombed the follow-up," she said to me, indignation decorating her words. She flipped my talker back on. Why did she sound mad at me? I looked up in surprise. "He hurt my feelings," I typed out on my meta-talker. "So what?" Mrs. V spat back. "Kids laughed. Even Rose," I typed. It was true. Though I could hardly admit it, even Rose had covered her mouth to stifle a laugh. "Did you get the highest score in the class?" Mrs. V asked, completely ignoring my attempt to make her feel sorry for me. I should have known better. "Yes." "Did Catherine help you in any way? Even a little bit?" "No." And then, "Let's get started." I looked at her, a little confused. "Started on what?" I asked. "On your study plan. You and I are going to practice, prepare, and push. I'm going to quiz you, and you are going to answer. We're going to learn geography, science, math, thousands of glorious tidbits of information. She sounded excited. Why? I asked carefully. You know how athletes get ready for the Olympics? They swim early in the morning and late at night. They run around the track for hours and hours without a crowd to cheer them on. I can't run very fast, I typed, and then I grinned at her. Maybe not, but you've got the fastest, strongest brain in the school, and you are going to try out for that quiz team next week. They won't let me be on the team, I typed slowly. Oh, yes, they will, and they'll want you, all right. They'll need you, Melody. You're going to be their secret weapon. You think? I typed and asked. I know. Now let's cut out all this fake feeling sorry for yourself and get started on studying. We've got 1 week. I'm the coach, you're the athlete. Get ready to sweat. Sweat stinks, I told her with a laugh. So let's get stinky. But first, you're going to pick up every single one of those cards. I knew not to argue. She took me out of my chair, sat me on the floor, and left the room while I pulled the cards that I'd knocked down into a messy pile on the floor. Penny helped. Then Mrs. V put me back in my chair and we got to work. She's going to be a tough coach. How is the test set up? She asked me. A, B, C, D, I typed. Multiple choice. Wonderful. Piece of cake for you. I wasn't sure about that, but I didn't disagree with her. She went to her computer and found a web page that listed every U.S. state capital. Did those in school, I told her. Great, so we'll do them again. I fake groaned. Mrs. V then looked up the capitals of all the major countries in the world. Gee, there sure was a lot of countries. But once she read them out loud to me, I had the info stuck in my head. What is the capital of Hungary? She demanded. I knew the answer was Budapest before she even gave me the 4 choices. Ankara, Berlin, New Delhi, Budapest. I pushed D, of course. Mrs. V didn't stop to cheer. She kept going. I correctly answered that Tokyo was the capital of Japan. I answered the capital of Ethiopia. Ottawa was the capital of Canada, and Bogota was the capital of Colombia. She quizzed me until Dad came to pick us up. As Mrs. V stuffed Doodle and some unused diapers back into Penny's bag, she explained briefly what had happened at school and what she planned to do about it. What we were already doing about it. Are you sure? Dad asked, glancing at me. Maybe we're setting her up for failure and she'll be hurt even worse. I'm absolutely positive, Mrs. V insisted. Can Melody stay a little longer to study? I'll give her dinner and bring her home in a couple of hours. That will give you some one-on-one time with Penny. You cool with that? Dad asked me. Yes, 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 I typed. I want to do this. Go for it, my Melody, Dad said, and he gave Mrs. V a thumbs up sign and left with Penny. After dinner, we moved on to science. I learned that the bones in the leg are the femur, the tibia, and the patella, and the fibula. Why can't they just call them something easy like the knee bone and the skinny leg bone? But whatever, I memorized them. I learned that insects are arthropods, and that they have tibias too. The study of insects is called entomology, Mrs. V said. That gives me an idea. Let's learn all the words that end in ology. I put my hand over my head and pretended to groan, but deep inside I was really jazzed. Which word means the study of words and their meanings? She asked me after we reviewed a very long list of ology words. I thought for a minute. I knew she was trying to trick me. Histology sounded like history, but for some reason I think it had to do with the skin. And the other one has to do with books, not words. So I typed in the letter D and took a guess. This time she did cheer. Let me get you home, Melody. Top athletes need their sleep. We'll do some more tomorrow. I grinned at her, tired and energized at the same time. Mrs. V had called Catherine and explained the situation, told her to stuff information into my head along with the macaroni at lunch. So the next morning, Catherine, of course, jumped right in. While we were in room H5, Catherine hooked me up on earphones. I listened to an old audio cassette on volcanoes. It was scratchy and skipped a little, but it gave me information. Volcanoes were named from the Roman god Vulcan. I could have figured that one out myself. I found out about lava and ash, and I learned about the whole city of Pompeii and how it got covered up when the volcano erupted. Surprisingly interesting stuff. I listened to tapes on Australia and Russia, on constellations and on the planets. You learning anything from these oldies but goodies? Catherine asked as she slipped in another tape for me. It was on diseases. Info always good, I typed. I feel you, she replied. Are you still upset about what happened in Mr. Deming's class? Deleted the memory. Need room for facts. I took the time to type. She gave me a thumbs up. I'm a little scared, I admitted. Suppose I mess up? I typed. You can do this, Melody, she said sternly as she adjusted the earphones. You certainly have enough smarts to be on that team. Go away while I take the test, I typed. Keeps Claire quiet. Gotcha, Catherine said. She held her hand up to slap my palm. It wasn't much of a slap, more like a mushy grab. But we were on the same page. Except for lunch and recess, I listened to tapes and worked with Catherine the rest of the day. She quizzed me on facts and dates and kings and math. That might be hard for me. Words float easy into my head, but numbers seem to sink to the bottom like rocks. I don't know why. Let's do it again, Catherine said gently as I got mixed up on a math problem about trains and their speed. Nobody rides trains anymore. Who cares? But she kept at it until it all made sense to me. I discovered that if I make numbers into a picture story in my mind, the answer comes easier. And I changed the figures to words. Magic. Instead of going for inclusion classes, I shook my head and told Catherine I didn't want to go. I wanted to stay and study instead. Evidently, I wasn't missed. Nobody sent a frantic message to room H5 wondering why Melody wasn't in class today. Nobody peeked their head in the door to see if I was absent or sick or maybe having a convulsion in the middle of the floor. Nobody seemed to notice at all.